Rahab was a woman of complexity, a survivor in a city built on commerce, trade, and idolatry. She lived in Jericho, a bustling hub surrounded by towering walls that symbolized its strength and wealth. But life for Rahab was anything but easy. She was known throughout the city as a harlot, a label that carried both stigma and opportunity. Her home, situated within Jericho's outer wall, was often a stop for merchants and travelers. Though her reputation made her an outcast among some, it also gave her access to information and whispers from beyond Jericho's gates. Rahab had long grown weary of the gods of Jericho. The idols of wood and stone offered no solace, no hope. But recently, stories had reached her ears, stories of a powerful God who had parted the sea, defeated mighty armies, and led his people, the Israelites, through the wilderness. Unlike the lifeless gods of Jericho, this God seemed alive, real, and unstoppable. The more she heard, the more she felt a stirring in her heart. What if this God was the true God? And if he was, what would happen to Jericho when his people arrived? Rahab didn't have answers, but she couldn't shake the feeling that her life was about to change. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Rahab stood by her window, gazing at the distant plains. The city gates had just closed for the night, and the streets were quieting. Suddenly, she noticed two men moving swiftly through the shadows, their eyes scanning their surroundings. They were strangers, clearly not from Jericho. Rahab's intuition kicked in. These were no ordinary travelers. They were Israelites. Her heart raced. The men approached her house cautiously, and Rahab stepped forward, opening the door. "Come inside," she said quickly, her voice low. The men hesitated for a moment before stepping in. Rahab bolted the door behind them and turned to face her unexpected guests. "You're spies, aren't you?" she asked bluntly. The men stiffened, but didn't deny it. "Don't worry," Rahab continued. "I want to help you, but you need to trust me." The spies exchanged a glance, their wariness evident. "Why would you help us?" one of them asked. Rahab's voice grew firm. "Because I know your God is the true God, the God of heaven above and earth below. I've heard what he's done, and I know Jericho doesn't stand a chance. When your people come to take this city, I want to make sure my family is spared." Before the men could respond, a loud pounding shook the door. "Open up," a gruff voice demanded from outside. "We know there are Israelite spies in the city. Bring them out." Rahab's heart leapt. "Quickly, to the roof," she whispered, motioning for the men to follow her. She led them up a narrow staircase and hid them beneath bundles of flax drying on the rooftop. Taking a deep breath, Rahab descended the stairs and opened the door. A group of soldiers stood there, their expressions stern. "Where are the men who came to your house?" one of them barked. "We saw them enter." Rahab met their gaze with steady composure. "Yes, they came here," she admitted, her voice calm. "But I didn't know where they were from. At dusk, just before the gates closed, they left. I don't know which way they went. If you hurry, you might catch them." The soldiers exchanged a glance, then turned and rushed off toward the city gates. Rahab watched them disappear into the night, her hands trembling slightly. Once the coast was clear, Rahab returned to the rooftop. The spies emerged from their hiding place, their faces a mix of relief and gratitude. "You saved our lives," one of them said. "And I'm trusting you to save mine," Rahab replied, her tone serious. "Promise me, when your people take this city, you'll spare me and my family." The spies nodded. "We swear it," one said. But you must follow these instructions. Tie this red cord in your window. When we come, everyone inside your house will be safe. But if anyone steps outside, their fate is their own." Rahab nodded, her resolve unwavering. She helped the men climb down from her window using the same red cord. "Go to the hills," she advised. "Hide there for 3 days until the soldiers stop searching for you. Then you can return to your people." The spies thanked her and disappeared into the darkness. Rahab tied the red cord securely in her window, a symbol of both her faith and her hope. That night, as the city of Jericho slept, Rahab lay awake, staring at the ceiling. She had made her choice, a dangerous choice that set her apart from her people, but deep in her heart, she felt peace. She had placed her trust in the God of Israel, and she believed he would not fail her. Jericho buzzed with fear the next morning. The soldiers had returned from their search empty-handed, and the rumors spread like wildfire. Israelite spies had been inside the city. Everyone was on edge, their eyes darting nervously as they spoke in hushed tones. Rahab moved through the marketplace, careful to appear as though nothing was amiss. She listened closely to the murmurs of the merchants and townsfolk. "They say the spies were seen near the eastern gate," one man whispered to another. "Why haven't we found them yet?" the other replied, his voice laced with frustration. "If they've escaped, it's only a matter of time before the Israelites attack." Rahab's heart pounded, but she kept her expression calm. Her red cord still hung in her window, a silent signal of her alliance with the spies. She knew she had taken a dangerous risk, and every glance in her direction felt like an accusation. That evening, as the streets quieted and the sun dipped below the horizon, Rahab returned to her house. She bolted the door and sat by the window, gazing at the cord. It swayed gently in the evening breeze, a symbol of her faith in the God of Israel. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. Her breath caught, and for a moment she hesitated. Steeling herself, she approached and opened it to find a familiar face. Her brother. "Rahab," he said, stepping inside quickly. "What's going on? People are saying the soldiers were here last night, searching for spies. Were they in your house?" Rahab's mind raced. She trusted her brother, but the fewer people who knew the truth, the better. "The soldiers thought they saw someone enter," she said carefully. "But they didn't find anything." Her brother looked at her skeptically. "You're hiding something," he said. "I can see it in your eyes." Rahab took a deep breath. "Listen to me," she said, her voice low but firm. "I can't tell you everything, but you have to trust me. When the time comes, you and the rest of our family must come to my house. It will be the only safe place." He frowned, confusion etched on his face. "Safe from what?" "Just promise me," Rahab insisted. "When I call for you, come here, and don't leave until I say it's safe." After a moment, her brother nodded, though he still looked uneasy. "I trust you, Rahab, but I hope you know what you're doing." As the days passed, the tension in Jericho grew. Scouts reported that the Israelite army was camped across the Jordan River, preparing to advance. The people of Jericho worked tirelessly to strengthen the city's defenses, reinforcing the gates and walls. Soldiers patrolled day and night, their eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of movement. Rahab kept to herself, avoiding unnecessary attention. She spent her days in quiet prayer, asking the God of Israel to protect her and her family. Though she didn't know what the future held, she clung to the hope that the spies' promise would be kept. One evening, Rahab stood on her rooftop, gazing out at the distant plains. The wind was cool, carrying with it a sense of foreboding. She could see the faint glow of campfires on the horizon. The Israelites were closer than ever. As she turned to go inside, a shadow moved in the corner of her eye. Rahab froze, her heart pounding. Slowly, she approached the edge of the roof and peered over. Below, in the alley, a figure lingered, watching her house. Rahab's mind raced. Had someone seen the spies enter her home that night? Was she being watched? She backed away from the edge, her hands trembling. Inside, she bolted the door and sat in the dim light of her lamp. She couldn't afford to panic. Whatever happened, she needed to stay strong, for herself, for her family, and for the promise she had made to the spies. The next morning, Rahab heard a commotion in the city. People were gathering near the gate, their voices filled with alarm. She hurried to see what was happening. From the walls, the Israelites' camp was now visible, their tents stretching across the plains like an ocean of white. The sight sent waves of fear through the people of Jericho. "What are they waiting for?" someone whispered. "Why don't they attack?" another replied, his voice shaking. Rahab stood in the crowd, her heart racing. She knew the Israelites weren't waiting for the right moment. They were waiting for God's command. Back in her house, Rahab prepared for what was to come. She gathered her family, instructing them to stay close. "Do not leave this house," she told them firmly. "No matter what happens, trust me, we will be safe." Her mother, wide-eyed with fear, clutched Rahab's arm. "How do you know this?" she asked. Rahab placed a hand on her mother's shoulder. "Because I have placed my faith in the God of Israel," she said, "and he is faithful to those who trust in him." As the sun set, Rahab lit a lamp and sat by the window, staring out at the horizon. She didn't know when the attack would come, but she was ready. The red cord swayed gently in the breeze, a beacon of hope against the gathering darkness. The morning air was heavy with anticipation. From the walls of Jericho, the people stared out in stunned silence. The Israelite army had moved closer overnight, their ranks forming an imposing line across the plains. But instead of launching an attack, they stood still, waiting for something unseen. Rahab watched from her window, her family gathered tightly around her, her heart pounded, the tension almost unbearable. "What are they waiting for?" her brother asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Rahab shook her head. "They're waiting for their God," she said, her eyes fixed on the scene below. Suddenly, the sound of trumpets pierced the air, their notes echoing off Jericho's thick walls. The Israelites began to move, not toward the city, but around it. Their procession was orderly and deliberate, led by priests carrying a golden object on poles, the Ark of the Covenant. Rahab's breath caught. She had heard stories of the Ark, a symbol of the God of Israel's power. It was said to be holy beyond imagination, representing his presence among his people. Now it was here, circling her city like a silent warning. The Israelites marched without speaking, their trumpets blaring at intervals. The people of Jericho crowded the walls, shouting and jeering. "What are they doing? Are they too afraid to fight?" one man yelled. Rahab's stomach churned as she listened to the mocking voices. She wanted to shout at them to stop, to tell them they didn't understand what they were dealing with. But she stayed silent. Her eyes locked on the red cord swaying in her window. For 6 days, the same pattern repeated. Each morning, the Israelites marched around Jericho in complete silence, their trumpets the only sound. And each day, the tension in the city grew worse. The soldiers patrolling the walls grew more agitated, their eyes darting toward the horizon as if expecting an ambush. Inside Rahab's home, her family huddled together, their fear growing with each passing day. "Rahab, what if they break their promise?" her mother asked one night, her voice trembling. "They won't," Rahab said firmly. "The God they serve is not like the gods of Jericho. He is faithful. Trust me." Her mother nodded, though her eyes still reflected doubt. On the seventh day, the mood in Jericho shifted. From the moment the sun rose, there was a sense that something was different. The Israelites were moving earlier than usual, their trumpets louder, their formation tighter. This time, they didn't stop after one circuit around the city. They kept going, completing a second, then a third lap. By the fourth lap, panic began to set in among the people of Jericho. "What are they doing?" someone shouted from the wall. "They're trying to tire us out," another replied. Rahab stood at her window, her knuckles white as she gripped the frame. Her family huddled behind her, silent and tense. She didn't know what the Israelites were planning, but she knew this was the day everything would change. By the seventh lap, the Israelites stopped. The silence was deafening, the air thick with anticipation. Then, without warning, the trumpets blasted a single long note, and the Israelite soldiers let out a deafening shout. The ground trembled beneath Jericho. At first it was subtle, like a distant rumble of thunder, but it grew stronger, the vibrations shaking the walls themselves. Rahab's family screamed as the house quaked, and she pulled them close, her heart racing. Outside, the unthinkable happened. The mighty walls of Jericho, the city's greatest defense, began to crumble. Stones tumbled, dust filled the air, and the once impenetrable fortress collapsed in a cascade of destruction. Rahab's house, built into the wall, shook violently but remained standing. The red cord in her window swayed wildly, a beacon of hope amid the chaos. The sound of battle erupted as the Israelite army surged into the city. Rahab turned to her family, her voice steady despite the terror around them. "Stay here. Do not leave this house. No matter what happens, they will come for us." Her brother's eyes were wide with fear. "Rahab, how can you be sure?" She placed a hand on his shoulder. "Because I believe in their God. He will not fail us." Minutes felt like hours as the chaos outside grew louder. Shouts and screams filled the air, mingling with the clash of swords and the cries of victory. Rahab prayed silently, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. Then, through the noise, she heard footsteps approaching her door. Her heart stopped as the handle turned and the door creaked open. Two Israelite soldiers stood there, their faces marked with determination. One of them pointed to the red cord in the window and nodded. "You're Rahab?" "Yes," she said, her voice trembling. "Come with us," the soldier said. "Your family is safe. We've come to keep our promise." Rahab gathered her family, leading them out of the house. The streets of Jericho were unrecognizable, filled with rubble and smoke. The sight of her city's destruction was overwhelming, but Rahab kept moving, her faith guiding her steps. As they followed the soldiers to safety, Rahab glanced back at the ruins of Jericho one last time. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain. She had placed her trust in the right God. The dust settled over the ruins of Jericho, the once mighty city reduced to rubble. Smoke rose from the scattered debris, and the cries of victory echoed through the air as the Israelite army secured the city. Amid the chaos, Rahab and her family stood at the edge of the destruction, their lives spared by the grace of God and the promise of the spies. The Israelite soldiers who had brought them to safety remained close by, ensuring that no harm came to them. Rahab's heart was a swirl of emotions, relief, gratitude, and a touch of grief for the life she was leaving behind. She glanced at her family, their faces pale but alive, and silently thanked the God of Israel for keeping them safe. Joshua, the leader of the Israelites, approached Rahab and her family. His presence was commanding, yet kind, his gaze steady as he studied the woman who had risked everything to help his spies. "Are you Rahab?" he asked. "Yes," she replied, her voice steady despite the weight of the moment. Joshua nodded. "You showed great courage and faith. Because of your actions, you and your family are spared. You will live among us as part of Israel." Rahab's eyes widened. She hadn't expected this. A chance to be part of something greater, to join the people of the God she now believed in. She bowed her head, her voice filled with emotion. "Thank you, my Lord. I will serve your God and your people with all my heart." As the Israelites prepared to leave the ruins of Jericho, Rahab and her family were escorted to the Israelite camp. The atmosphere was unlike anything Rahab had ever experienced. The camp was orderly, filled with the hum of activity, but there was a deep sense of unity and purpose that she found inspiring. The people treated her with curiosity and kindness, though some cast wary glances knowing her past. Rahab held her head high, determined to prove herself worthy of this new life. In the days that followed, Rahab began to learn about the ways of the Israelites. She listened to their stories of God's faithfulness, their laws, and their customs. She marveled at how their lives revolved around their covenant with God, and she eagerly embraced their teachings. One evening, as the sun set over the camp, Rahab stood with her family, watching the horizon. Her brother spoke quietly beside her. "Do you think they'll ever truly accept us?" Rahab smiled, her gaze unwavering. "They will. Not because of what we've done, but because of who their God is. He welcomes anyone who seeks him. We are part of his story now." As the weeks turned into months, Rahab's life among the Israelites transformed her. She became known not as the harlot of Jericho, but as a woman of faith and courage.